Welcome to Suri Cheating Story, where we share true stories of betrayal in love. Our channel brings heartfelt, real-life experiences from those who have endured the pain of infidelity. Whether you're facing challenges in your own relationship or seeking to better understand the complexities of love and trust, Suri Cheating Story is the place for you. Subscribe now to explore the emotional depths in the path to healing with us. The sun blazed down on the busy streets of New York, its heat intensifying the endless rush of people who walked past Suri, seemingly indifferent to the chaos that surrounded them. Sitting on the curb, her knees drawn to her chest, Suri watched the world go by, feeling like a mere shadow in a sea of faces. Her once vibrant brown eyes were now dull and weary, the weight of poverty and rejection etched into her features. The long, disheveled hair that once framed her face like a crown of beauty now lay tangled and lifeless. She hadn't eaten in over 48 hours, and the pain in her stomach was nothing compared to the gnawing emptiness inside her heart. It wasn't just hunger that consumed her. It was the crushing realization that she had nowhere to go, no one who cared. She had once dreamt of a life filled with love and warmth, but now all that remained was the cold embrace of the streets. As the city's pulse thundered around her, Suri tried to ignore the sneers of passers-by. Some people threw a glance of pity her way, while others outright avoided looking at her, as if her presence could contaminate their perfect, polished lives. She had seen it all before. The wealthy, dressed in their designer suits, walked by without even a second thought, as though people like her didn't even exist. "I'm invisible," Suri whispered to herself, her voice cracking under the weight of hopelessness. "No one will ever care." She shifted uncomfortably, trying to block out the pang of hunger that gnawed at her insides. Her stomach growled audibly, and her eyes instinctively followed a man passing by with a takeout bag in his hand. The smell of fresh food taunted her senses, but she forced herself to look away, not daring to beg. Suri had promised herself she would never beg again. She had learned that lesson the hard way, when the few coins she had begged for were often met with disgust or outright refusal. The pride she clung to, the only thing that had ever been hers, prevented her from sinking to that level. Yet, as the hours stretched on and the light of the afternoon began to fade, the temptation grew stronger. Her thoughts were interrupted when a woman appeared in front of her. She was older, perhaps in her mid-40s, with graying hair and a warm smile that seemed almost out of place in the harsh, indifferent city. The woman looked down at Suri for a long moment before reaching into her bag and pulling out a sandwich wrapped in paper. "Here," the woman said, her voice gentle. "You look like you could use this more than I can." Suri's heart skipped a beat. It had been so long since anyone had treated her with kindness. She took the sandwich hesitantly, her fingers trembling as she unwrapped it. The scent of fresh bread and roasted meat filled her senses, and for a moment she forgot the cold, the hunger, the isolation. "Thank you," Suri said, her voice choked with emotion. "You have no idea how much this means to me." The woman nodded, her smile never fading, before she turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Suri alone with the warmth of her gift. As she took the first bite, the world seemed to slow down. It wasn't just the food that filled her, but the overwhelming sensation of being seen, of being acknowledged. For the first time in what felt like years, Suri felt a flicker of hope in her chest. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her that there was still goodness in the world. Maybe not everyone had forgotten the power of compassion. Suri finished the sandwich quickly, savoring every bite, and as she stood up to leave, she noticed two men sitting nearby. They were in a similar state as her, disheveled, hungry and lost. Without thinking, Suri walked over to them, offering them half of the sandwich. "Hey, let's share," she said softly. "No one should go hungry if we can help each other." The men looked at her, their eyes full of surprise and gratitude. One of them, an older man with graying hair, nodded slowly. "Thank you, miss," he said, his voice rough from years of living on the streets. "You're a good soul." Suri smiled, the warmth of the exchange spreading through her like a beacon of light in the darkness. But just as the moment seemed to bring a sense of peace, a voice cut through the air. "Don't even think about it." "Suri," the voice hissed. Suri turned to see a woman, her eyes cold and unforgiving, dragging a young girl behind her. The woman's perfectly manicured nails were dug into the girl's arm, and she pulled her away from the small group without a second thought. The girl, Suri's only daughter, looked back at her with a mix of confusion and fear. "Mom," the girl whispered, tugging at the woman's arm. "Why can't I help them? They're hungry." "Because we don't associate with people like them, dear," the woman spat. "They don't deserve your help." Suri's heart sank as the woman, whom she knew all too well, continued dragging her daughter away, her own flesh and blood, caught in the web of her mother's cruel indifference. The girl had been raised to believe that wealth and status were everything, that compassion was a weakness, and that the poor were to be ignored if not feared. But something in the girl's eyes, something that mirrored Suri's own longing for kindness, gave her a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for change. As the two women walked away, Suri stood frozen, watching them disappear into the crowd. For the first time in what felt like forever, she had the glimmer of a plan. She wasn't just going to survive, she was going to make sure her daughter saw the truth about the people who lived on the streets and the people who turned their backs on them, no matter what it took. The next few days passed in a blur, each one dragging on longer than the last. The kindness that Suri had experienced seemed like a distant memory, a fleeting moment of warmth in a world that was colder than ever. The hunger gnawed at her, relentless. But it was the other feeling, the emptiness of being invisible, that hurt the most. One evening, as Suri wandered aimlessly through the streets, she was stopped by a sleek black car that pulled up next to her. The window rolled down, and a man's voice called out from inside. "Excuse me, are you Suri?" he asked, his tone calm but authoritative. Suri's heart skipped a beat. How did he know her name? She stepped closer, wary yet curious. "Yes," she said cautiously. "Who wants to know?" The man smiled faintly. He had sharp features, a well-tailored suit, and an air of confidence that suggested he was someone important. "My name is Peter Larson," he said, extending his hand. "I work for Mrs. Victoria Howard." Suri's stomach twisted at the mention of Victoria's name, the woman who had turned her life into a nightmare, the woman who had controlled every part of her existence and made her feel like nothing more than a tool. Suri was no stranger to manipulation, but this felt different. This felt like an opportunity. Peter must have noticed the hesitation in her eyes because he quickly continued. "I know you've had some tough times, and Mrs. Howard has taken an interest in your situation. She has a proposal for you." Suri's pulse quickened. A proposal? What could Victoria possibly want from her now? She had nothing left to offer. But before she could voice her skepticism, Peter pressed on. "You see," he began, "Mrs. Howard believes that you could be a great asset to our family. She has a plan that could help you, and your daughter." His eyes were calculating, watching her every reaction. "All you have to do is listen." Suri hesitated. There was something about the way Peter spoke that made her uneasy. But at the same time, the mention of her daughter piqued her curiosity. Anything that could help her little girl, even if it came from someone like Victoria, was worth considering. "Why should I trust you?" Suri asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. Peter's smile didn't falter. He seemed unfazed by her wariness. "Because, Suri," he said softly, "you have nothing to lose, and Mrs. Howard's offer could give you everything you've been searching for. A way out." The words hung in the air like a promise, but Suri couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had seen this kind of manipulation before. Promises of a better life, a way out of the darkness, but they always came at a price. But then again, what choice did she have? Suri glanced at the car, and for the briefest of moments, she thought about the possibilities. The warmth, the comfort, the security of a home that she could give to her daughter. It was tempting. "Fine," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'll listen." Peter nodded, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Good," he said. "Come with me." Suri climbed into the back of the car, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and curiosity. As they drove through the city, she couldn't help but notice the contrast between the life she knew and the world she was being led into. The sleek skyscrapers, the luxury vehicles, the smooth, polished surfaces that reflected a life she could never imagine. The car stopped in front of a grand building, a mansion that towered over her, its windows sparkling in the moonlight. Suri felt small in comparison. The ornate iron gates opened, and they drove up the long driveway to the entrance, where a large marble staircase led to the front door. Suri's mind was spinning. What was she walking into? What did Victoria want with her? As Peter opened the door for her, she stepped out of the car and was escorted inside. The foyer was a masterpiece of opulence, with gilded mirrors, sparkling chandeliers, and walls lined with expensive art. She felt like she didn't belong here, like an imposter who had somehow stumbled into a world that was not meant for people like her. "Mrs. Howard is expecting you," Peter said, leading her up a grand staircase. "This way." Suri's heart was pounding as they entered a lavish room where Victoria stood waiting, her sharp eyes fixed on Suri, as if she were a piece of art to be admired. The woman's cold demeanor made Suri's stomach twist in a way that no amount of food ever could. "Suri," Victoria said, her voice smooth and controlled. "I'm glad you could make it." Suri stood awkwardly in the doorway, unsure of what to do next. Victoria studied her for a moment, her eyes narrowing as if evaluating her worth. "I've been watching you," Victoria continued, her tone laced with a strange sense of power. "I see potential in you. You're resourceful, strong. You could be an asset to this family." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You've had a hard life, haven't you?" Suri bit her lip but said nothing. The woman didn't care about her struggles. She didn't care about the pain, the loneliness, the desperation that Suri had lived with for so long. She only cared about what Suri could offer her. "I have a proposition for you, Suri," Victoria said, stepping closer, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. "I want you to marry my son." Suri's eyes widened. "Marry your son," she repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. "Are you out of your mind?" Victoria smiled, a cold, calculating smile. "I know this sounds unbelievable, but it's a win-win situation. You marry my son, you become part of the family, and your daughter. Well, she will never have to live like this again. You'll have a home, a future, everything you've ever wanted." Suri felt her knees go weak. The thought of a future, of something more than the endless struggle she had known for so long, was almost too much to comprehend. "You're asking me to marry someone I don't even know," Suri said, trying to keep her voice steady. "What's in it for you? What's the catch?" Victoria's smile never faltered. "The catch, my dear, is simple," she said. "You will help me teach my son a lesson in humility. You'll be the means to a greater end. And in return, I'll give you everything you've ever dreamed of. A place in society, a future for your daughter, everything you've ever wanted." Suri's mind raced. It was an offer she couldn't refuse, or could she? Suri's thoughts swirled as Victoria's proposal hung in the air, thick with unspoken implications. The weight of the offer pressed on her chest like a leaden weight. She had spent years struggling, scraping by just to survive. The thought of having a home, a steady life, for her daughter, it was almost too much to bear. Yet the terms of the deal felt wrong, like a trap. Could she trust Victoria? A woman whose cold gaze had always felt like ice. Victoria noticed Suri's hesitation and took a step closer, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "You don't need to worry, Suri. I know this isn't easy to accept, but think of the future. Your daughter will be safe, and you will never have to beg again. No more hunger, no more uncertainty. This life," she motioned around the luxurious room, "could be yours. All you have to do is marry my son." Suri took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had spent so long in the darkness that the idea of stepping into the light felt almost foreign, like a dream she didn't deserve. But for her daughter, for the chance to give her a life free from suffering, could she really turn it down? "And what about your son?" Suri asked, her voice wavering slightly. "What does he think about this?" Victoria smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He doesn't know yet, but he will. Once you marry him, he'll understand. This is all part of a greater plan." There was an eerie calmness in her voice, as if she were orchestrating a grand scheme that Suri was just a pawn in. Suri's stomach churned at the thought of becoming part of some twisted game. She had seen enough manipulation in her life to recognize it when it was staring her in the face. Yet the lure of security for her daughter made it hard to resist. "What if I don't want to marry him?" Suri's voice was firmer now, but she couldn't help the flicker of doubt in her heart. "What if I don't want to be part of your plan?" Victoria's eyes hardened, and for the first time, Suri saw a flash of something darker. "You'll have no choice." "Suri," she said, her voice laced with an icy finality. "This is not a request, it's an opportunity. If you don't accept, you and your daughter will be back on the streets where you belong." The words hit Suri like a slap. She recoiled inwardly, feeling the sting of Victoria's cruelty. But in her heart, she knew that she didn't have a choice. She was stuck, caught between a rock and a hard place. This was her chance to escape the nightmare of living in the gutter, to finally give her daughter a future. Suri nodded slowly, the weight of her decision sinking in. "I'll do it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Victoria's lips curled into a triumphant smile. "Good. You've made the right choice. Now we'll move forward with the plan." A sick feeling twisted in Suri's stomach, but she pushed it down, focusing instead on the thought of her daughter. She could do this. She had to. The next few days were a whirlwind. Suri was taken to a tailor to be fitted for a dress, one of the finest garments she had ever worn. She was told to prepare herself for a life she never thought she would enter. The house, the servants, the luxury, everything felt so alien to her, like she was living in someone else's skin, but it didn't matter. She kept her eyes on the prize, a stable life, a future for her daughter. And then came the day of the wedding. The church was grand, its high ceilings soaring above them as if trying to touch the heavens. The marble floors gleamed beneath Suri's feet as she stood at the altar, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked around, barely able to believe this was happening. She was here, in this opulent place, about to marry a man she barely knew. Victoria was standing at the front, her icy smile plastered across her face. Suri could feel her eyes boring into her, watching her every move, as if she were an object to be controlled. There was no warmth, no joy in this moment, just a sense of cold duty. Suri's gaze shifted to the man standing beside her, the groom she had been forced to marry. His name was Robert, and he looked as detached from the situation as she felt. His dark eyes were unreadable, his face blank, as though he were a mannequin, not a living, breathing person. This wasn't love. It was an arrangement, a cruel, calculated one. Suri couldn't help but wonder if he knew what was happening, if he knew that his mother had orchestrated everything. Did he care? Did he even want to be here, standing beside her, about to bind their fates together? "Do you, Suri, take Robert to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The priest's voice cut through the thick silence, and Suri's stomach twisted. The moment of truth, she swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I do." "And do you, Robert, take Suri to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The priest's gaze shifted to him. Robert's eyes met hers for the first time, and for a brief moment, Suri thought she saw something. Recognition, maybe even pity, in his eyes. But it was gone before she could be sure. He didn't answer immediately. For a second, there was only silence, stretching on forever. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and emotionless. "I do." The words were a cold agreement, a contract sealed without emotion. It was done. Their fates were tied together, just as Victoria had planned. Suri could feel the weight of the moment settle in her bones, and as the ceremony continued, her mind raced. What had she done? What had she just agreed to? She had sold herself, traded her heart for security, but in the end, she couldn't help but wonder if it had all been worth it. The days following the wedding blurred into a strange new reality. Suri had traded the dirt and despair of her former life for the polished floors and opulence of the Howard estate. But it didn't feel like freedom. It felt like a gilded cage. Everything was immaculate, too perfect, and yet it felt hollow. The mansion, with its towering ceilings and shimmering chandeliers, could never offer the warmth of a real home, the kind she had dreamt of for her daughter. The weight of the decision she had made clung to her like a heavy coat. Suri had tried to convince herself that she did it for the right reasons, for the future she could give her daughter, for the hope of a better life. But every time she caught a glimpse of Robert's distant, unfeeling gaze, that conviction faltered. Robert, her husband, had become an enigma. He was polite, if not courteous, but there was no warmth in him, no love. They had yet to speak beyond the obligatory pleasantries of their wedding day. At night, he slept in the vast, cold bed beside her, his back turned as if the space between them could not have been wider. There was no intimacy, no affection, just the silence of two strangers bound together by an arrangement neither of them had asked for. Suri tried not to think about it. She told herself that it didn't matter. She told herself that the money, the security, the chance to provide for her daughter would be enough to numb the emptiness she felt growing inside her. But every time she watched Robert sitting at the dinner table, speaking about business deals with his mother or with the board members over the phone, the reality hit her again. She was just a pawn in Victoria's game. She wasn't part of the family. She was just a means to an end. Then came the day that changed everything. Suri was walking through the grand hallway when she saw Robert standing by the window, his back to her, staring out at the garden. The golden light from the setting sun bathed his figure, casting long shadows on the marble floor. He looked so detached, so distant. For a moment, she wondered if he even knew she existed beyond the walls of their marriage contract. But as she walked closer, something stopped her. His voice, low and hoarse, cut through the air like a knife. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his back still to her. "This marriage, this life." Suri froze, her breath catching in her throat. She had no idea what to say. For the first time since their wedding, Robert was speaking to her, really speaking. She had always been afraid of the silence that separated them, but now that he was breaking it, she wasn't sure if it was a good thing. "I don't know why she chose you," Robert continued, his voice filled with frustration. "She doesn't care about you. She never did. You're just a tool for her, a way to control me, a way to keep me in line." Suri's heart pounded in her chest. Every word he spoke felt like a revelation, and yet she couldn't decide if she was relieved to hear it or if it made things worse. It was the truth she had been avoiding, but hearing him confirm it shook her. She had always known deep down that Victoria was using her, but now hearing Robert speak those words out loud made everything feel more real, more suffocating. Suri finally found her voice. "Then why did you agree to it?" she asked, her words sharp with frustration. "Why did you marry me?" Robert turned slowly, his expression unreadable. There was a deep sadness in his eyes, a depth she hadn't expected. "Because I had no choice," he said, his words like a confession. "I'm trapped in this family. If I don't play along, if I don't do exactly what she wants, she'll destroy me. She's already destroyed everything I cared about." The pain in his voice surprised her, and for the first time, she saw him not as her cold, distant husband, but as a man caught in the same web of manipulation that she was. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of connection between them, a shared understanding of what it meant to be a pawn in someone else's game. But before Suri could say anything else, the door to the room opened, and in stepped Victoria. Her presence seemed to suck the air out of the room, and Suri immediately felt the shift in the atmosphere. Robert's face hardened, his shoulders tensing as though he had been caught in an act of betrayal. "Is there a problem here?" Victoria's voice was sharp, her eyes flicking between the two of them with a calculating gaze. "No, Mother," Robert said quickly, his tone colder than before. "There's no problem." Suri's heart sank. She could feel the tension building, the storm that was about to erupt. She knew that Victoria had a way of controlling him, of twisting him into submission. But it was different now. Robert wasn't the same man she had married, a stranger to her and to his own desires. Something in him had shifted. Victoria didn't miss a beat. "Good," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "I wouldn't want to see any more misunderstandings between you two. This marriage is a contract. You know what you need to do, Robert. And you, Suri." She turned to Suri with that same icy gaze. "Remember your place." Suri wanted to say something, to challenge her, to call her out for the woman she truly was. But she knew better. This wasn't a fight she could win. Not yet. As Victoria left the room, the oppressive silence that followed seemed even more suffocating. Suri stood there, torn between the man she had married and the reality she had to face every single day. Robert's words echoed in her mind. She wasn't alone in this trap. They were both victims of the same manipulative woman. But the question that haunted her more than anything else was this. How long could they both endure this? How long before they broke completely? The days continued to drag on, and the tension between Suri and Robert remained unspoken, but palpable. The mansion that once seemed like a dream now felt more like a prison. Suri had convinced herself that she was doing this for her daughter, but each passing moment only deepened her dissatisfaction. The cold, calculated nature of her marriage to Robert, his silence, his indifference, was driving her to the edge. She spent most of her time in the expansive garden, trying to breathe in the fresh air and clear her mind. But it was hard to find peace in such an environment when the weight of her reality pressed in on her from every side. Victoria, ever the manipulator, would come and go with her usual smug confidence, leaving Suri feeling smaller and smaller. Then came the night that Suri could no longer ignore the cracks in her facade. It had been a particularly long day filled with meaningless conversations, empty gestures of affection from Robert, and constant reminders of Victoria's control. As Suri lay awake in their bed, her mind was racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had lost herself in the midst of it all. She had no freedom, no voice. She was simply an extension of someone else's agenda. As she turned restlessly in the bed, she felt a presence beside her. Robert, his face softened by the dim moonlight, was awake, staring up at the ceiling. His silence had become a constant companion, but tonight something was different. For the first time in a long while, Suri could feel the unspoken words between them. "Robert," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need to talk." He turned to face her, his eyes tired, heavy with the same exhaustion that plagued her. "About what?" "About everything," Suri replied. "About this life, about our marriage, about what's really happening here." He sat up slowly, his expression unreadable. "There's nothing to talk about," he said quietly. "We made a deal. We do what we're supposed to do." Suri's heart tightened at his words. "That's just it, Robert. We've been doing what's expected of us. But where does that leave us? We're both prisoners in this house, tied to a contract that was never meant to bring us happiness. Do you even care anymore?" He didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally, Robert spoke, his voice low and resigned. "I care," he said, "but I don't know how to fix this. I'm not the person you think I am, Suri. I never wanted this." Suri's breath caught in her throat. For the first time in what felt like forever, she saw the cracks in Robert's facade. The guilt, the regret that had been buried beneath his indifference. It made her chest ache with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. "I'm not the woman you think I am, either," Suri whispered, "but I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending everything is fine." Robert reached out and gently took her hand, his grip warm but uncertain. "Neither can I." Suri looked into his eyes, searching for some hint of the man she had hoped he would be, the man she had once believed in. But what she saw instead was a man broken by his own choices, a man caught in the same web of manipulation that had trapped her for so long. The weight of the truth hung heavy in the air between them. They were both trapped, not by the world around them, but by their own decisions. The choices they had made, the paths they had followed, had led them here. And no amount of luxury, no amount of material wealth could make the emptiness go away. Suri squeezed Robert's hand tightly. "We need to get out. We need to break free from her." Robert looked at her with a mixture of fear and determination. For the first time in a long time, he seemed willing to fight, not just for himself, but for her, for them. And in that moment, Suri realized something. No matter how high the walls were, no matter how thick the chains that bound them, there was always a way out, if they were brave enough to find it. If you find this story interesting and want to see more touching, tense, but meaningful situations, don't forget to subscribe to our channel today. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Share this story with your friends and remember to like the video so we can stay motivated to bring you more great and meaningful content. Thank you for watching and supporting us.